Welcome to the December issue of Transportation Tidbits. The best thing about calling it Transportation Tidbits is that if you have to search for it in your email, odds are the word tidbits does not apply to anything else in your email, so it's very sortable. Certainly helps me out. I'm Mike Berry, Executive Director for WASBO, and let me first begin by saying happy holiday season to everybody from your friends and colleagues at WASBO. We're delighted that you could spend your lunch hour with us. Um, we have a great topic on unusually, and isn't that the key word, unusually hazardous transportation. Key concept for all of you who are doing transportation aid involved in transporting students. We got a great team with you today to cover this topic, and I'm going to turn it over to our colleague from New London, Joe Marquardt. Joe's on our board, and delighted to have a chance to say hello to you, Joe. I guess it's been a little while. How you doing?
Hey, great, Mike. Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction, and welcome to those of you who've joined us today. I am excited to talk about unusually hazardous transportation areas as well. And every day's hazardous for transportation, right? For those of us who work in school districts know that transportation is a challenge every day. But I have the privilege of introducing Brian Misfeldt, the Director of Finance and Operations from the Altoona School District. And Brian is going to go through his presentation and talks about Bloomer. That's where he was as a superintendent, and he's been a superintendent in another district as well. So he has great experiences that he's excited to share today. And selfishly, I'm going to say Brian and I graduated from one of the best school districts in the state of Wisconsin, Chippewa Falls. So I want to give us a shout out as well. But now I'm going to introduce Brian.
All
Thanks,
right.
Joe.
Hi.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Joe, so much for the introduction, and thanks to Joe and Caitlin for reaching out. Certainly, we'll start by saying I'm not necessarily an expert in this, but have gone through the process, and I think it's valuable just to hear from those who have gone through the process, because DPI doesn't provide a whole lot of guidance on what this should look like. So certainly the process that we went through in Bloomer isn't perfect for everyone, but it definitely hopefully will give you a starting point as you go through this process if you need to. So I'm going to share my screen here. I put together a presentation, and Jeff, who will be presenting next, we kind of joked that we used the same template completely by coincidence, but I guess we're keeping a theme going here. So
Hey, Brian, as you get going, a quick reminder to everybody, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and use the chat feature, I guess, or the Q&A. We'll monitor both of them. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. So as Joe mentioned, I was the superintendent in the school district of Bloomer for 6 years prior to just now transitioning to the school district of Altoona as the director of finance and operations. And oddly enough, when Joe and Caitlin reached out to me, we had just started the process of updating our unusually hazardous transportation plan here in Altoona. So going through this process again, like maybe many of you, but in Bloomer, just to give you an idea, the school district of Bloomer is in west central Wisconsin, and showing you a map of the district here. We were a school district of about 164 square miles. The main part of our population is here, where you can see some small logos. Those logos indicate where our schools are. But a fairly rural school district, but the majority of our population is in the city of Bloomer, right here, kind of in the center of the district boundaries. Something that's unique about Bloomer is we do have a state highway 40 that runs right through the school district. It actually, our main street is part of Highway 40. So it creates some challenges there for transportation. We also have a railway that runs through the middle of the district, parallel to Highway 40, that is fairly commonly used. So certainly those are factors that impacted our unusually hazardous transportation plan. We revised, I was actually fortunate in that the district had revised their plan in 2015. In 2015, the plan was revised for a few reasons. First of all, we had a number of new sand plants go in. Those of you that are familiar with areas that have fracking sand plants know that it increases large truck traffic as the sand trucks are going through. It also really increases railway traffic because they rely heavily on trains to transport some of that fracking sand. We also had opened a new school just prior to 2015 that moved our elementary school out of the city limits, just out of the city limits. Previously, it had been located in the middle of the city, so moving it outside of the city limits created some challenges. Because we have the state highway that runs through the city, we see a lot of speed limit variances where we go from 45 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour in a really short span, which creates some challenges. They looked at lack of sidewalk connectivity at that time. As I mentioned, they looked at the highways, lack of crossing guards. In 2017, the plan that I was a part of, we began looking at this largely because of some shifting demographics. With that building of the new elementary school at the location where our middle school was already located, we started to see some new developments pop up. Naturally, when there's available land around schools, you often see developers want to put houses in those spots. And we were seeing new development pop up, which resulted in a lot of school-age children shifting to a new part of our city where we hadn't had housing before. We also saw some shifting into an older part of our city that I would say is a bit more of a low-income area. And more of our student population had shifted into that part of the city. So really over a number of years, about a 5 to 10 year span, saw a lot of our students shifting from the rural area to different parts of the city. We also had a major daycare, the largest daycare in our community, moved into a new location near our schools. And we're planning for a very large expansion, which was going to bring in a lot of obviously a lot of younger students, but especially a lot of our 4K students attended that daycare before and after school, meaning we now had a lot of students that were currently, the way our plan was set up, were not in the unusually hazardous transportation area. And our daycare reached out to us just to find out about busing because a lot of those 4Kers were then walking a relatively short distance to school, but because of their age, it was something that was of concern. Again, sidewalk connectivity in Bloomer was a big concern. If you've ever been in a city that's talking about sidewalks, obviously that's a really contentious issue because the property owners typically have to pay for the installation and they also have to take care of upkeep. So sidewalks in Bloomer, we joked a lot that our city council talked more about sidewalks than anything else, I think, at their meetings. And because it was such a hot topic, we hadn't seen a lot of movement on sidewalk connectivity. When the 2015 plan was released, we expected a lot of sidewalks to be added, and they simply hadn't been. And also at the same time, we were working on our unusually hazardous transportation plan. We were working with the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission on a program called the Safe Routes to School program. So we were conducting a study on safe routes to school, and the Safe Routes to School program is really focused on identifying ways to make sure that students that do walk or ride their bike to school have safe paths to get there. But what we found in the process was it gave us some really good data and information that we could use to inform decisions we were making about our unusually hazardous transportation plan. So just to kind of give you a brief overview of that Safe Routes to School process, because it was an important process. And even if your regional planning commission doesn't offer this or you don't have one of these, I think the process we went through really helped us in our unusually hazardous transportation plan. So this study was done over a few months. We reviewed the locations of all of our schools. They did a great analysis of our sidewalk connectivity and reviewed where we had crosswalks. And something I hadn't thought of, but is really important, is reviewing street lighting. As you know, living in Wisconsin, during the winters, our students are often traveling at times that there isn't much light. They're traveling in the morning before the sun rises, and at night, oftentimes after the sun has set. We also monitored traffic patterns around our school. We actually had spotters who were out analyzing how much traffic we had. They were monitoring the speed of the traffic that went through those areas. And again, being one of our schools being right on a state highway, but our other schools just off, one of the things we found was typically our traffic patterns showed that vehicles were traveling in excess of the speed limit quite often, even through some of our school zones. And we also surveyed students and families about how they get their students to school, what they would prefer to do, and what their concerns were related to travel. And found a lot of the concerns were related to sidewalks, lack of crosswalks, but a relatively new concern that came up that the safe routes to school that the Regional Planning Commission had found in recent surveys was concern just about student safety as they're walking to school, not even related to traffic, just violence, abductions, those sorts of things in unlighted areas. Obviously, we see those stories in the news a lot, and you hope it never happens, but that came up a lot amongst parents just as a concern they had. So just to give you a brief overview of who was on our committee. And again, we were reviewing this just about 7 years after it had already been done. So I would say that our committee was a bit smaller than you may want if you're reviewing this for the first time in 15, 20 years or for the first time ever. But I was on the committee, led it, and at that time I was the superintendent, but also served as the director of operations for the school district of Bloomer. I should note, I didn't mention this earlier, the school district of Bloomer, just to give you perspective, is a district of about 1,260 students. So not a real large district, not a real small district. We often said we're about dead right in the middle of districts in the state. Our high school principal was on the committee. Certainly you could have any of your principals. We included our private school because we do provide transportation for them, and they're located in the dead center of our city. Our transportation manager, and I'm guessing some of you here are your transportation manager, but we contracted with Cobeson, so our transportation manager through Cobeson played a role in our committee, and I would say maybe played the most significant role. Certainly as transportation manager, he was more familiar with our city than maybe anyone else, just from the standpoint that he has driven all the routes, had ridden on all the routes, and knew every one of our pickup locations, knew where the hazardous intersections were. Our school resource officer was on the committee. We had a member of the sheriff's department, and this is key because when you submit your plan to DPI, you do need a letter from the sheriff's department supporting your plan. So we reached out to rather than waiting till the plan was done and reaching out and them having no knowledge of what we were doing, we reached out ahead of time, and the sheriff designated one of the deputies to serve on the committee. We also had a staff member on the committee, and I noted that I had this on the wrong slide, but we had our street department manager on our committee as well. Depending on the size of your city, that might be your city planner. For us in Bloomer, we didn't have a designated city planner, so our street department manager was on the committee as well. Just an overview of our meetings here, so you can kind of look at the process, and obviously a lot of items were discussed at these meetings, but our initial meeting, we just got together and we discussed potential areas of concern, and I listed some areas there. These are actually the areas that DPI suggests. So if you go to DPI's website and just search unusually hazardous transportation plan, they actually have suggestions about some areas you should look at. Age of pupils, lack of sidewalks, crossing guards, lack of law enforcement or law enforcement's ability to patrol areas where students may be walking, railroad crossings, the width of the shoulder and road, again, something that I hadn't thought a lot about, but certainly plays a role in this. Your traffic counts, temporary hazards such as construction projects or street repairs. So over the summer, Bloomer did a major project where a lot of their streets were torn up, and that changed traffic, but also changed areas that our students could walk. And then any other conditions that you identify with your local city council or local units of government. We discussed communication we received, and for us, the key communication we'd received was from that daycare center and just concerns they had with their 4-year-olds walking to school before and after school. But you may receive communication from other individuals. And something to note is, I just learned this through this process, that when you do receive a concern through communication, there is a process that DPI requires that you do review those concerns. And I believe the set amount of time is 30 days that you review those as part of your hazardous transportation plan. And then we identified priorities for review and assigned tasks. Our subsequent meetings were then smaller groups. So we kind of split up some of the duties. One of the first things we did is the sheriff's deputy, our school resource officer, myself, and our transportation director drove our district and reviewed all of the bus stops in our district. We hopped on one of the school buses and just drove around and talked about any concerns the bus company may have with pickup locations. We reviewed our sidewalk connectivity. Fortunately for us, having gone through that safe routes to school process, we had some really good maps made up, but in most cases, that's something you can get from your city. They typically have maps of your sidewalk connectivity, so you can take a look at that. And then we communicated with stakeholders just through the survey process of our Safe Routes to School program, but also talking with our principals, talking with staff, and discussing our daycare providers. We got a lot of information from them just to get an idea of where their concerns may land. Subsequent meetings, I would say we probably had 4 or 5. And again, none of those were with the full group, but with small groups, identifying areas of concern, identifying any areas someone felt may be a hazardous transportation area. And then I spent a couple weeks pulling all of that information together and putting it together in a plan, which we reviewed at our final meeting. I presented the plan to our stakeholders on the committee, and we discussed potential revisions. There certainly were a few areas that we had identified as we did kind of that district-wide tour. And again, our district is small enough that it was really easy to do that district-wide tour. And some of your districts, that may not be possible. That might be a day-long activity, but I don't know that you necessarily need to go on a full tour. You may know already where there are some areas of concerns, and discuss some revisions, and even had what I would call some debate about whether areas truly were hazardous or not, and discussed why they may or may not be hazardous. So just showing you here, this is a map of our sidewalks. This was created by through that study, that Safe Routes to School study. But again, your city probably has some sort of a map on file. What you're seeing here is that the areas in orange are areas where there are no sidewalks. So those are areas we paid special attention to, because if a student is walking in those areas, they're walking in the road. Obviously, that becomes particularly concerning, especially in winter when you may have snow out there. You may have shorter stopping distances. You may have piles of snow on the road, which even impacts the width of the road. But what we found is there were very few areas we do have sidewalks, and almost none of our students had a walkable path where they could walk sidewalks all the way to school. So while we were talking about walking a lot, obviously walking impacts, that's where the hazard comes in, and that's where we really wanted to look at, is it safe to walk? And if it's not, it's probably a hazardous transportation area. We then overlaid the map, the sidewalk map, with what the Regional Planning Commission called our walk shed. This shows the yellow area is a half-mile walk shed. The 1 mile, or the green area is a 1 mile. We really didn't have to go out to 2 miles, because as you start to get to 2 miles in our district, you start to push outside the city limits anyway. So for us, the 1 mile walk shed was enough to take a look at. But again, what we found is you can see, especially in that 1 mile walk shed, there are almost no sidewalks in that area. And even within the half-mile radius, there's a lack of connectivity, or the state highway or railroad tracks intersect the connectivity. which creates a concerning area. It's also worth noting that in our district at this time, just because of a lack of interested parties, we didn't have crossing guards. Prior to this, we did, but before I got to the district, there were a number of crossing guards. But as those people left and weren't interested in anymore, we really had trouble recruiting crossing guards. So what we came up with then is our final plan. And I'll just briefly go through this, and certainly Caitlin has access to this and can feel free to share it. Our plan, just going through here, started out with, I left the rationale for the 2015.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
We're still seeing the slide. We're not seeing the open
Okay.
document, just FYI.
Let me just stop my share here and seeing the plan now?
Looks great.
Okay, sorry about that. So we obviously had a cover sheet and table of contents, but as you get into the plan, first of all, we outlined why we revised the plan. And I left in the 2015 revisions because most of them still applied to our current situation. We just added some additional. So you can see here the transportation committee members at that time, the rationale was laid out. Again, I mentioned sand truck traffic, the age of students and where they were walking, the location of the school, identifying especially that we had a location of schools, that we had a new school built. Speed limit variances for us were a big deal. As you come off from outside the city into the city, you're dropping from 45 or even in some places 55 miles per hour down to 25 in a really, really short period of time. Talked about our lack of sidewalk connectivity, and then the highways and lack of crossing guards on those highways. Then outline the rationale for our 2022 revisions. It was a bit shorter, but again, talking about our change in demographics, just the location of our students shifting to different parts of the cities. And also, I've mentioned it a couple times, the addition of that daycare. So bringing a big population, a large population of students into a small area where they were required to walk to school. We went through just descriptions of each of our schools just to outline where they sit and what some concerning characteristics were of the roads around them. And I won't go through each of these, but again, went through our elementary, middle school, high school, and St. Paul's Catholic and St. Paul's Lutheran schools, which just happen to be right next to each other. But both of them, including both of them in the study, because we do provide transportation for them. And then provided a summary of where our concerns lied. We noted, what we did is created a map, and these maps, we didn't have the maps from the Safe Routes to School program yet at this time, but our transportation program put together some maps showing our pickup and drop off locations and showing the areas that we designated as hazardous transportation. So this map, it's not my favorite map because it's hard to read. It was put together by our transportation provider, but the different colors outline the different hazardous transportation areas for each school. So obviously our elementary school, which is up in this area, and I'm sorry that this is kind of turned sideways, is up in this area. Our middle school and elementary school have different hazardous transportation zones than our high school, which is right here. Our high school, we did find that some of our areas were suitable for students to walk to because of their age, and because they didn't have to cross Highway 40, which runs right through here, or right along here, or the train tracks, which cross through here. Just for reference, our middle school and elementary school are right here, and that daycare I referenced is located right in this area. So it's very close to the schools, but again, the age of the students was concerning to us. This appendix just shows all of our drop-off locations just to get an idea of where we're already picking students up. Is it reasonable to adjust some of those to encompass more of our students? And then, as I mentioned, a letter from our sheriff, which is required as part of the plan, just indicating that he endorses the plan and agrees with the findings. Last piece is your board also needs to approve this plan. So we included our board agenda and then also the minutes from the board meeting with the area of approval highlighted. What I'll tell you that we found in our plan review is the biggest finding was one area of our plan, and I'm just gonna stop my share and share again the maps here as I talk about this. Biggest finding was that our elementary school, which on this map is located right out here, the area right in this, just south of our elementary and middle school, previously had not been identified as unusually hazardous for transportation. And what we found is as we watched traffic patterns, because of the increase in population in that area, I think because of people trying to avoid traffic congestion in the morning with our two schools there, a lot of our parents were using back roads to get to the elementary school and middle school, roads that previously we hadn't considered as hazardous, but now because we were seeing more traffic there, because there was a lack of sidewalks, and because we'd seen a part of our population shift to that area, we felt became unusually hazardous. And then also that elementary school, which is just across the road from our middle school and probably only 2 blocks from our elementary school, because we now had 30 to 40 4Kers crossing the street to get onto the sidewalks to walk to the elementary school. That was added to our plan, especially because during the time they were crossing the street happened to be the time that we had drop off at our middle school and elementary school. So we saw significant increase in traffic at the same time that our youngest students were trying to cross the street. So the result of our plan is we didn't see major changes as a result of this plan, but we did see a very small area that previously had not been in our plan added. In that area, because of our changing demographics, added a significant amount of students that now qualified for transportation that hadn't previously. That's really just a brief overview there. And what I would say is just the keys of, again, really looking at those sidewalks, looking at the width of roads and traffic patterns for us were really crucial. The process we used for reviewing traffic patterns, quite frankly, was a couple mornings and a couple evenings, we just put out spotters who went out and watched and observed, and through either through law enforcement or with the Regional Planning Commission, monitored speeds using speed guns just to keep an eye on how fast people were really traveling as they went through there. And then communicating with our parents through a survey just to get an idea of what were their concerns with the safety of their students, especially those parents who were in areas where their students were required to walk or ride to school. Put my contact information here. Certainly feel free to reach out. I'm happy to share our plan or even that Safe Routes to School plan if you want to look that over and it's something you want to reach out to your regional planning commission to see if it's a study that could be done. If it is a study that can be done, certainly it was a time-consuming process, but I would say it was one of our most valuable tools in updating this. Certainly something you can do on your own, but having their resources certainly made the job a little bit easier. So with that, again, thanks to Joe and Caitlin for reaching out, and don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any questions in the future.
Brian, there was one question. Does Bloomer have any Amish schools to which transportation is provided?
We have one Amish school. They do not opt for any transportation whatsoever. So that did not come into play for us because they did not engage with us at all in terms of transportation. Just for lack of a better term, they wanted nothing to do with us. We'd check in with them every year. It's my understanding that prior to my time there, we did have some individual parent contracts with them, but never provided any busing in any way, shape, or form.
Awesome. Well, thank you. If you can stick around, we'll do a little Q&A at the end. But with that, I'd like to introduce Jeff Elsen in his, I believe, second year with La Crosse School District as their transportation manager, I think is the right title?
Yeah, Energy and Transportation Manager. Thank you, Caitlin.
Awesome.
We had started our plan about 3 years ago, and our sheriff's department wasn't really prepared to do anything at that time. And what I'm going to do is I'll just share my screen also. Like Brian said, him and I were thinking alike, which is awesome. And so I'm Jeff Elsen, Energy and Transportation Manager with School District of La Crosse. I've been with the school district for 2 years. I've learned that obviously that we have one area in the school district right now that is in our hazardous, unusual hazardous transportation area. We learned how important it was. And like I said, 3 years ago, we really tried to make some more areas work. So just recently, and I'm still right into the board just approved the minutes, and I'll kind of go through what I've learned, tailing off exactly what Brian had said. It's going to be similar to what he's got, but some things that I learned that you will see that are a little bit that are different that I've seen. Kind of what I'll be going over is, recognizing, like Brian said, the unusual hazardous areas, working with the local sheriff's department. The sheriff's department with us, they helped us write up the plan. They went to the sites. We presented it to the school board, and then we'll be sending it to the DPI, which is Department of Public Instruction. Once it is approved from DPI, the district plan will go out to all of our schools. So recognizing the unusual hazardous areas, we are contracted through Grow Rightway. So we talked to their transportation manager and asked about all the areas that they had seen last year. We put them all down in maps. We actually, like Brian with his school district, we rode on the bus. We went and looked at where a lot of the kids were going across busy intersections. We addressed those areas, and like what Brian was saying, examples that we've seen were crossing guards, not enough of them. Sidewalks didn't have crosswalkways. We do also have railroad crossings that are in with this our area, and then the width of the shoulder of the road or highway. And we have two major busy county roads that have been an issue right from day one, because when you stop that bus on that busy highway, those cars are still doing 55 plus. And we realize that we've got to have different areas to pull over or to pick up these kids in a safe location, and worked with laying out different routes. Like Brian, we did design a map to show the areas of concerns. I learned with the map, there were certain situations like, and I'm going to show an example. When we started writing up the plan, here was the layout of my maps, and mind you, they are very vague. So when I called DPI, and as you can see, these are the ones we're in the works with right now. And when I called DPI, they said, well, Jeff, that looks great, but we need maps to scale. So one thing I
Hey,
learned.
Jeff, we
Yeah.
can't see your maps right now.
Oh, sorry.
All good.
Let me see here. I might have to go like. Sorry about that. Let me grab back into this here. I guess what I might have to do, Caitlin, is try and figure out how to get my maps to pull up. I'll explain them. So is Brian, his shows the intersections, actually streets. My maps were kind of generic, and they had them colored. And once I talked to DPI, they're like, well, those are great, but again, what we need you to do is actually get them to scale. And again, you can contact your city. or look them up online. And so we have printed off newer maps. Now they have them to scale with the actual streets and addresses. So the next thing, write up a plan to explain why you're having the concerns and locations that you've chose. So we set up a time with the local sheriff's department, went and sat with them, actually rode around with them, showed them the maps of the areas that we felt were definitely some concerns with all of our schools. And once we did that, the sheriff's department met with their staff, their sergeant and captain, and they investigated the areas like we did with our committee. And they looked at them and realized that they were not in the areas that were going to be safe. Once they did that, the sheriff's department looked over our plan to make sure that the locations were good. They said, let's put something together. They came up with an actual recommendation letter that we looked at, went over with them, and got it approved. Once that letter was approved by our committee, we did lead into presenting it to the board. After the paperwork was laid out, brought it to the board, showed them the unusual hazard areas, again with newer maps, and showed the board that this is what was important to us, that we needed to really focus on these unusual hazard areas. Once we did that, we made sure it was on the agenda. The school board looked it over and approved it. And like Brian says, you get the signed agenda in minutes. And at the board meeting, I was there in case we needed to go into more detail and explain the areas and why we've chosen them. Realizing this, they approved it, and we're in the works of right now getting it all laid out. And once I get my minutes from last Monday's meeting, we're going to be submitting it to DPI. Once the plan is approved and signed by the school board, we then can submit it to DPI. I touched base with DPI, and they wanted me to explain a few things that within 60 days, but not less than 30 days from the receipt of the sheriff's report, DPI must determine whether there is unusual hazards that exist, and also determine whether the plan provides proper safeguards for the pupils. And I'm gonna have to look at that a little bit more, because there might be some more areas where the school district of La Crosse is gonna have to make sure that those safeguards are in there, so that DPI will approve it. With 30-day waiting period required by statute, with those 30 days of DPI's receipt of sheriff's report, any aggrieved person may request a hearing on the determination by the sheriff of the plan. And basically, they were making sure that if it was not approved, that you can go back to DPI and work with them to make sure that we can read or lay the plan out and then get it approved. Once the plan is approved, you basically can claim categorical transportation aid for pupils less than 2 miles in the district. Has approved a unusual hazard transportation plan on file. One of the things I would point out that it is important that it is less than 2 miles. The other thing, districts can receive up to $15 per child who is transported from a stop that is in the unusual hazard transportation. And being so new in this position, I've learned that it is very important that when you're doing your reports, that you make sure that you're recording it under less than 2 miles. That is it for my slides. I know Brian had went into great detail on more stuff, and I just want to say thank you for WASBO letting me be a part of this, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. I will pass it off to Rhonda to introduce our last speaker today.
All right. Our last speaker is John Campbell. He's the Director of Traffic Engineering and Safety Services for Traffic Analysis and Design. For short, we call them TADI. And John, we work with John in the Sun Prairie School District to review our current hazardous transportation plan for our secondary schools and make recommendations for additions or deletions to that plan. And we went through this work when we changed some boundaries. We added a new high school and adjusted all of our middle school boundaries. So I will pass it on to John.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Rhonda. I'm happy to be here to present today and talk about a data-driven approach to UHT plans. And, I want to thank Jeff and Brian. I thought your presentations were really good. So I hope you enjoy mine as well. Being a traffic safety engineer, I have a short story to tell in that, how did I get involved with UHT plans? We had been working with Verona Area School District, and they were building a new high school, and we were helping them with the traffic, the traffic circulation, how many lanes they needed on the roads, and if a traffic signal was warranted. And they had mentioned unusually hazardous transportation plans. We really didn't have any idea what that meant. Were they transporting gas tankers through town or something? But as we got into it, it was about pedestrian safety and establishing walk zones and busing areas. And they had noted that the Dane County Sheriff had limited resources to be able to help develop the UHT plan. That they still needed to review it, but they wouldn't be able to put as much effort as they had in the past in developing these plans. So we asked, well, what do these plans entail? And we dug into it a little bit more. It was about kind of determining, where it would be safe, for children to walk to school. And that a lot of these decisions were based on opinion. And whether it was safe or unsafe, using subjective criteria from different people throughout the parents, school district, sheriffs. And we thought, well, subjectivity leads to controversy, and that can create some challenging situations and meetings and make the development of these UHT plans pretty difficult. So I went back with my team, and I work with these really smart, fantastic traffic safety engineers. And we said, well, how can we take an objective approach to this? We reviewed what had been going on for UHT plans in Wisconsin. We also looked nationally, and there are some other states that develop UHT plans and had been putting some objective criteria to it. And then we researched pedestrian safety. And what we've seen is a lot of UHT plans were developed 20 or 30 years ago, and updated as needed, especially when there's been changes to a school or a new school built. But in that time period, there's actually been a ton of research done on pedestrian safety, whether or not there's a sidewalk exists, what the speed of vehicles are. And we said, well, we know how to use this information. And we ended up developing a scoring metric, and it's based on exposure. As students are walking along the school, they're exposed to risk when they're walking along roadways and then when they're crossing roadways. And we developed this metric taking into account a whole bunch of information. Is there a sidewalk? What's the volume of the vehicles on the road? What speed are they going? Do you know, a pedestrian struck by a vehicle going about 40 miles per hour has about a 50% chance of dying? If we get that down to 20 miles per hour, it's less than 10%. So speed makes just such a huge difference with pedestrian safety. Parking, that can block sight distance. And then, how long are they walking along this particular roadway? Same thing with crossing, how much pavement do they have to cross? What are the volumes, the speeds? What type of traffic control? Are there stop signs? Are there signals? Are there yield signs? Those all make a difference when it gets down to the research and the numbers. And then are there safety features? There's things like pedestrian countdown timers. Those are becoming more commonplace. Restricting right turns on red at signals where you have pedestrians. High visibility crosswalks. And one thing we look a lot at is crossing guard locations. And the last thing we found as we researched, and we knew this, but the cognitive abilities of somebody in first grade is different than the cognitive abilities of someone who's 16 years old. So we can't expect somebody who's in first grade to be able to, feel comfortable and safely walk to school, encountering the same things that like a 16-year-old could do. So we developed some thresholds that are based on what the research says about cognitive ability of different age groups. And that's something we work with establishing for school districts at levels they feel comfortable, but it's generally elementary. Middle is, about 3 times higher threshold, and high school might be 9 times higher than elementary. Next up is just going to kind of walk you through the process a little, how this works, what approach we take. We identify the border. Most of the time we're looking at like a 2 mile, or if the limit's smaller for a particular school district, walking distance from the school. We inventory the roadway and crossing data. We can use Google Earth for a lot of this information, but we have some really cool techniques and equipment. We have cameras we can put on our car that take time-lapse photos. So we get really up-to-date information because the roads are always changing. And Google Earth might only get updated every 2 or 3 years. So we want to use the latest and greatest information. Also gives us an opportunity to drive the school district area and see it for ourselves. And then we work on applying this criteria. And it's a cumulative score. It adds up as the distance goes on. And my graphic works here, as you continue along the path, you're adding that score up. And then in this example, you're crossing more of an arterial or collector road. And that's for this elementary school, got it above the threshold that we were considering hazardous. One thing I really enjoy about this process is it's enabled us to discuss solutions and put some numbers to those solutions. So we can identify areas that would be, considered hazardous in the existing conditions, and then work with the city or the village and add a crossing guard or RRFB, crosswalk, to open up some more areas to walking, or at least reduce the score in certain areas that might have students going to them. And as part of that process where we're looking at the scores, we'll work with the school district and establish what thresholds their community feels comfortable with. And this is usually based on what the historic level was. We try to set thresholds that kind of align with what has historically been hazardous in their communities. Oh no, I'm flashing. Hopefully I stay on here. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, I'll just keep going then. It may have disappeared, but and this is how it works in Oshkosh. We had laid out the existing schools, the existing conditions. They were looking at a new elementary school, and we determined kind of where that hazardous border would be. But then it led to some really interesting productive conversations about if we made improvements in select locations, we could really expand those borders, add crossing guards, add high visibility crosswalks. And this was very productive for them because they were looking at redefining the borders of their school. You know, some of the schools were absorbing students from another school that was closing. So this was something that we did concurrently with that process of establishing the school boundaries. And then we finalize and document the areas that are hazardous. And I think really some of the key benefits of taking this data-driven approach is it gives you confidence presenting the results. You're using data to help drive your decisions. I like that it validates the need for safety improvements. You can take this information to your village or city and really justify like why this improvement's important. And then lastly, it's a very equitable process. Essentially, every parcel within that 2-mile limit is treated equally from the scoring criteria standpoint. So somebody on one side of town is treated the same way in this process as someone on the other side of the school district. And then just in a closing slide that, you know, this is something we developed, a science-based approach. We've recently completed UHT plans, as Rhonda mentioned, in Sun Prairie, and mentioned Verona. We've also worked with Monona Grove and Oshkosh school districts. The Dane County Sheriff was very pleased with our approach. And we found that, you know, it's definitely a collaborative effort between the school districts, bus companies, and other stakeholders involved. But I was happy to be able to, you know, share this approach with you. And, you know, I, like the other presenters, I'm sure, are happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, John. We did have a couple questions come through regarding roundabouts. The first one, do you have any suggestions for safely crossing a roundabout? There are lights and crosswalks in place. Is there a direction? If there is a crossing guard, where is the most effective place for them to stand?
I know I can answer a little bit about the roundabouts. One thing that's nice with the roundabouts is the speeds are typically lower on the approaches and exits. That's not always the case, especially in multi-lane roundabouts. One thing I really like to see at the crosswalks of a roundabout, we call them advanced yield lines, where about 20-30 feet in front of the crosswalk, it's like a shark teeth design, and you put a sign next to it that says yield here to pedestrians. We want to create space between where vehicles are yielding and where they're actually crossing. As far as crossing guard location, I don't have an answer for that exactly, but maybe somebody else on the call has more experience with placing a crossing guard at a roundabout.
I know at La Crosse School District here, we just got new roundabouts in, so it's really good that that question is out there because I would be interested in it also. I do know we do have one crossing guard that we're looking at putting at one of them, but that's for our district.
Thank you both for your input on that. Along with roundabouts, John, what do you recommend the distance be between a roundabout and a bus stop?
Good question. That varies depending on, yeah, I'd have to look into the design standards of what it said. I'm not a roundabout designer per se, but if you definitely would want some spacing. I always look at intersections as there being the functional area of the intersection. So that's where traffic would queue, change lanes. and you'd want to, in my opinion, avoid that area.
There. It was mentioned about $15 per student if transported into a hazardous area. How does a school look into this?
I can jump in for that question, Caitlin. Amber, when you file your transportation mileage reports, the number of students that are riding your buses, you are going to report them in the appropriate categories. So like Jeff was sharing, it's really important to make sure when you compile that report, either as a district or with your transportation company, that you're able to demonstrate how far away they're living, and if they are in the hazardous transportation approved area, then they are eligible to be reported, and that's how you receive transportation aid in the following year.
Thank you, Joe. Jeff, did La Crosse make revisions to the plan because of complaints or requests, or was it because of opening new and closing some of the schools? What brought about that process?
Yeah, great question. One, it was more about parent request, and then also as a district realizing that where we have areas we needed to do something. And so the gentleman that was before me started the process going, moving forward, and we were looking out to make sure there was safety for those kids. So and as far as schools opening or closing, we haven't closed one school, but we have not changed anything. In fact, that's why we're doing it, because we have more kiddos getting on buses. So we're transporting them more into different locations. So.
Well, thank you for being proactive. Kathy Fry just wanted to note on Joe's comment that you'll not be able to enter any students in the 0 to 2 mile zone unless you have an approved plan on your reporting. And that's Kathy Fry with the DPI. Ooh, getting rhymey today. Anybody have other questions they would like to ask of our panelists?
I just want to make a comment that, for everybody who's involved in this, one thing that impressed me in listening to these presentations was just the amount of thought and planning and thoroughness that goes into categorizing your UST and your staff, your walking plans and your traffic plans in general. This is not an area to wing it, right? Looks like the best plans are the ones that are really well thought out. The Bloomer plan, it looked like, was the product of at least a year's work. So that was what impressed me most.
Yes, this certainly seems to be something not to be taken lightly. One new question. John, does TADI work in consulting with all areas of the state, or are you specific to the greater Dane County area?
No, we work through the whole state of Wisconsin and the Midwest, but most of our work is within Wisconsin. I'm based out of southeastern Wisconsin, but I do work throughout the state. I have for a long time.
All right, looks like John just got a lead. Way to go, John.
Steve, you're right. Routing software is a big help to determine walkouts from your schools. Before we wrap up today, just a quick reminder, I dropped the evaluation for today's session that includes a little fill in the blank to suggest future topics. So if you have a chance to complete that, we would greatly appreciate it. That helps us a lot. Kathy Fry just dropped her contact information in the chat as well. She is your DPI contact for UHTs. So please utilize her as a resource as well. I will be posting all of our handouts, and you'll get that via email along with a recording of this session, if not later today, early in the day tomorrow. And please mark your calendar to join us for lunch again on February the 21st for our next Transportation Tidbits. A big thank you to all of our panelists today and to our committee. We really appreciate all the work that goes into this. Any closing comments, Mike?
We're right on 1 o'clock, so let me just say again, thank you to our panelists, thank you to everybody who joined us, and happy holidays from WASBO. Thanks, everybody.